Right.
So how are you, Pierre?
Good, good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How's your lockdown treating you?
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. And we're so sorry to hear about the frosts at the moment. How are the vineyards?
So we've made a tour in the vineyard last week, but it's quite early to say for us because most of the buds they are not started. So most of the leaves they were still in the bud. So it's difficult to assess the effect of the frost before the bud are starting to grow really. So we should be able to know more precisely in 2 or 3 weeks time from now. So I would say at least one third is already lost, but the rest it's not clear. So we have to wait. So the chance also we have in the domain is that in the Haute Côte de Nuit it's always a bit later to start. And most of the buds they are not started in the Haute Côte de Nuit, so they were probably also less affected by the frost than the vineyard in the Côte de Nuit, and less affected also than the Côte de Beaune Chardonnay. So we are not the most unlucky.
And when do you start thinking that you're safe? Around the 25th of April, that starts to be the time when
normally we say in France we say we have the frost saints. So there is 3 dates. It's the 11th and 12th of May. So after the 10th of May, normally it's okay. You have no risk of frost, but until beginning of May, you can still have some frost in the vineyards.
Yeah,
it's not over.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, we keep fingers and toes crossed for you. Yeah, and thinking of everyone over in France at the moment. But I think I'm sure everyone's kind of collecting their different samples and everyone's beginning to arrive. And yeah, I think we're good to go if you want to start, Richard.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
so I will share my screen.
Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. I hope your Red Cross packs all arrived with some nice wines in them. We're delighted to welcome Pierre Gros this evening. We've been visiting the domain and seeing Pierre's father, Michel. I was working out probably 1995, 1996 was the first time we went there. And we've been going there ever since. And it's always been a great treat to visit the domain. Michel is our go-to guy for an honest appraisal of the vintage as well. You always get a completely unbiased and an honest evaluation of what happened. So I'm sure that'll continue in years to come with you, Pierre. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing all about the domain and tasting your lovely wines this evening.
Absolutely. And also, if anyone has any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function at any time as usual. And yeah, over to you, Pierre.
Thank you. So to start with a brief summary of the domain today, and we go after on the history of the domain. So right now we are farming a little bit less than 23 hectares of vineyard based in 2 areas. So the first area is the Haute Côte de Nuit, where we have 15 hectare vineyard, and the Côte de Nuit with mostly Vosne-Romanée and Nuit Saint-Georges, where we have 8 hectares of vineyard. So I will just have a quick overview of the history, not everything because it will be too long. But the start of the domain and of the family, because there are several Gros domains right now, but the common ancestor is Alphonse Gros, and he started the domain in 1830 when he married a girl from Vosne-Romanée. So he came from a village just next to Vosne-Romanée, but he married this woman, and he started to buy some land in Vosne-Romanée because at the time it was more convenient to work really close, because there was no engine to work in the vineyard. So he bought some part of the Vonrovalley vineyard we still have in the vineyard. And he also bought the most famous vineyard for us, which is the Vonromanée Premier Cru Clauderea. And he bought it in 1860. So at the time, it was already a monopoly, and it's still a monopoly today of the domain. So after the domain was transmitted over the generations, so there was Louis Gustave Gros. He bought mainly the vineyard of the Richebourg. So the Richebourg are currently found mostly by Gros Frères et Sœurs. After there was Jules Gros. Jules Gros, he bought the Clos Vougeot parcels and also the Échezeaux plots. And after his son Louis Gros, he also developed a lot the domain, but mainly on the commercial side, so on the bottling side. And the big change was after Louis Gros, because he had 4 children. So my grandfather Jean Gros, which is here, one son which is François, and one son and one girl who are Gustave and Colette. So Gustave and Colette, they separated and they founded Domaine Gros Frères et Sœurs, which is still the same name today. Jean Gros, which founded Domaine Jean Gros, and François Gros, who is now named Domaine Anne Gros, because Anne Gros is the daughter of François Gros. And my grandfather also split his domain in 3. So Michel Gros, the first child, Anne-Françoise Gros in Pomard, his second daughter, and the last one is Bernard Gros, and Bernard Gros is now running Gros Frères et Sœurs. So there are 4 different Gros domains in Burgundy from the same branch. So you can see the different origin of the domains.
Amazing.
So my grandfather, he mostly developed the vineyard in the Haute-Côte de Nuit. It was the work of his life to develop this area. He was really fond of this area of vineyard. We'll talk about this a bit more when we'll taste the Fontaine Saint-Martin, about the development of the Haute-Côte and the origin of this area. But it was the main work of his life. And my father also developed the vineyard during the 80s and the 90s. So he bought some vineyard in Chambol-Musigny, in Moret-Saint-Denis, and also in the Haute-Côte de Nuit. He further developed the Haute-Côte de Nuit parcel that was started by his father. So we'll move on a little bit on the vineyard.
Yeah, so, just a question. How old are the vines at Clauderea? You touched upon
on the Clauderea, so we can talk about this when we will taste. Yeah. But in the Clauderea, we have different ages, because we replanted some parts. So we have really a mix of different ages. But the average age is around 40 to 45 years old. So the oldest are almost 70 years old, and the youngest are just 4 years old. Okay. So we replant some parts, but not everything, because the parcel is big, so we can replant only some part every decade or so. So just to have a look on the vineyards. So this is the part of the Côte de Nuit where we have vineyards. So you have Vonromanée here in the middle. So this is the base of the domain. So this is where we have the most of our vineyards. You have also Nuit Saint-Georges on the left, where we have also a lot of vineyards, and we have some in Vougeot with the Clos Vougeot, some in Chambol-Musigny, and some in Moret-Saint-Denis. And since the vintage 19, we are also farming a small plot in Gevrey-Chambertin, but it's for the next vintage. Right. So we'll talk about this later. Cool. So to speak a little bit more about the work in the vineyard, so we have 2 different approaches, because the vineyards are quite different in the Haute-Côte de Nuit and in the Côte de Nuit. In the Haute-Côte de Nuit, the density is lower than in the Côte de Nuit, so we have on average 5,000 vines, so feet of vines per hectare, whereas in the Côte de Nuit it's 10,000, so it's 2 times more. So the rows are wider, and The main difference is that in the haute côte de nuit we are able to have grass within the row all over the year. So we have grass which we don't destruct every year. It's different in the Côte de Nuit because it's really narrow between the rows. So we have to work. So we do work the soil every year. Whereas in the Haute Côte de Nuit, we only work the soil underneath the vines, but not in between the rows. So it's also the main difference. And the specificity also in the Haute Côte de Nuit is that most of the plots, they are quite steep. And the choice made by my grandfather was not to plant the rows in the sense of the steep, but in the sense of the lines of level of altitude. So we have what we call terrace. Mm-hmm. Each row is a small terrace, so it's quite specific of our domain. There is not so much terrace in the Haute Côte de Nuit, and it's more difficult to work with the soil, but it's more interesting. The main reason was the erosion because of the rain, of the storms. So when you have a big storm, you tend to have the earth going from the top to the bottom, and you lose earth every time you have a storm. So this type of terrace, they tend to reduce this effect of erosion.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
And Pierre, you're using Geosamp in the Côte de Nuit, a single geo training system, and in the Haute Côte, you're using a double cordon.
No, so in the Côte de Nuit we use only griot, the simple griot or griot poussard, and in the Haute Côte de Nuit we have both. So we have griot and we have cordon. We have both. So normally at the beginning, when the vines are young, especially in the Haute Côte, we use the cordon because cordon is a shorter pruning system and it tends to reduce a little bit the crop, so it increases the quality. But when the vineyards are becoming older, we convert them back to griot to have more production, because when the vines are older, they don't produce anymore. So we use the griot to produce a little bit more with the old vines.
I know we touched upon the frost earlier, but in terms of not just climate change, but global warming, are you making a few changes in how you're working in the vineyards, or?
Yes, yes. For example, for the frost, so we are doing this at least since 10 years now, but we are pruning in 2 times. So we do the first pruning, but we let a long what we call baguette, so the stick of wood, we let them long with more buds than we want to have, and this has to effect to make the buds of the top start before. And when we come to do the final pruning, it tends to make the debudding, so the start of the buds, 1 week or 2 weeks later than if we do just the pruning in one time. And so we reduce the potential effect of the frost. So this year it was not enough to reduce the total damage, but it's a way to reduce the frost problems, because we have more risk of frost because we have more warm winters. So the vegetation is starting earlier, and when we have frost in April, it's more advanced in stages than it was 10 years or 20 years ago. So this is one change we make. We also make changes in the vinification, because before sometimes 20 or 30 years ago, we had struggles to have a good ripeness. And right now we are changing to have it's more a problem to have too much ripeness sometimes. So we have to be really careful with, for example, the harvest date. So it's a key factor of success, so to speak, to make a good vintage or not. If you harvest too early, you have the sugar, but you have not the technical maturity. And if you harvest too late, you have it's too heavy, you have too much alcohol. So you have to choose the right spot to do the harvest at the good time. And we are also reducing a little bit the maceration, because we have more ripeness, so we don't need to have as much extraction as we used to do in the past. So in the past, most of the time we were making what we call the hot maceration at the end of the fermentation. We were heating, so we were keeping the heat of the fermentation for 2 or 3 days to have more maceration and more extraction. But we are not doing this since at least 3 years. We are not doing it anymore because it's not necessary with the ripeness we have.
Okay.
No more questions?
Actually, you know what? I do have another one that I wanted to ask. I was debating whether, it's the same or not. But Richard, you know, I touched upon the other day about we saw our producer in, was it Kenzie? The producer who talked about frost and what they're using. I forget the name of the.
The propellers in the vineyards for frost.
Oh yes.
I guess with the site of the INAO, now you're a protected site. You can't have these the propellers in the vineyards.
No, we can have them because there is already some propellers in the vineyards. For example, in Von Romanet there is one. It is owned by Munier Gibourg, but it is used for several producers. But the propellers, they are only useful when you have a light frost, and mainly a frost, what we call a white frost. So only a scenario where the cold air is coming down from the hill, and it's starting to pile up in the bottom of the hill. So it's mainly to protect the vineyard on the bottom, because you have an accumulation of cold air, and the propeller is moving this cold air, and it's mixing it with the hotter air of the top. But for the frost of last week, it was not useful, because it was cold everywhere. There was nothing to mix with the hot air, because there was no hot air. Everything was cold, so it was not useful. But it can be useful sometimes. 2 years ago in 19, it was useful for some sectors, yes, for some sectors that are really sensitive to frost.
And we have a question from Victor from Chez Bruce. He says, "Hi TH gang. Question if possible, has the change in maceration affected the wines at all, despite the ripeness of fruit?"
It's difficult to say. I would not say it like this, but we're trying to achieve when we have one style what we want to achieve, and when we have high ripeness, we tend to reduce the maturation to have not too much, for example, not too much tannins, not too much structure.
Yeah.
So when you to go at the extreme, if you reduce too much the maturation, you have wines which is too light and which has not enough body and structure. But we were kind of forced to reduce it, because if we were doing the same maceration as we used to do 10 years or 20 years ago, we would have wines which are really heavy bodied, heavy structure. So we try to do the same wines that we used to do 10 years ago with higher ripeness. So we had to reduce the maceration. I don't know if it answers the question.
No, I think it does. Yeah. Cool.
Great. And so Pierre, if there are any other, it'd be great to hear some other points from the domain, and I'm sure everyone's really looking forward to tasting the wines with you as well.
Yes.
But before we do, there's just one further question here. Sorry, I put my glass on so I can actually read it. It says, will you move towards including some whole bunch with the climate change, or will you always be a disciple. I can't say the word disciple. And that's from Paul Robineau.
Yes, so right now we are distemming everything. We don't use whole bunch. I don't say we won't change, but right now we haven't made any tests or any trials on whole bunches. But yes, from my point of view, it's an interesting way to tackle the issue of the climate change, because this whole bunch tends to give more freshness. So you have to be careful, because if you use too much, also you have too much greenness. So we are not really used to do this type of thing, but it's one way we could work on in the future. Yes.
Does the wood become ripe at the same time as the grape? Because the chances are that if you're picking a little earlier because of climate change, the wood isn't necessarily ripe at that point.
Yeah, I would say the wood is never really ripe in the bunch. No, in the bunch, it's mostly, it's always a little bit green. It's not really ripe. So it's if you use really too much bunch, you will always get some greenness in the wines at the end. But for me, you have to choose the level. You cannot use 100% of bunches in every appellation. For some appellation, for some vintages, maybe, but most people, most winemaker, they use 20, 30, 40%, 50%, but not 100%. So you have to adjust the percentage of whole bunches in your winemaking, but you can have the good effect without having the greenness at the end.
Okay. Am I right in thinking that sometimes the older the vines, the riper the stems can become?
I'm not sure, no.
Okay.
Good to clarify though.
Yeah. No, I remember because I did the vintage at Telegraph, and they always used the stems from the old vines. And it's just
but the point, maybe, but also the problem with old vines is you have smaller berries and smaller grapes. So the ratio of stem to berries is higher, so you have more stem per berries. So you have to be careful also.
Okay.
Okay. Shall we move on to the tasting?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, please. Yeah. I think everyone's ready to taste some wine. Some of your beautiful wines.
The first one, maybe it's in the presentation.
I hope everyone's enjoying their minis.
Oh no, it's not this label. I have it here. Yeah. So the first one is this one, Fontaine Saint-Martin Vintage 17. I have one bottle also here. So first we will talk about the vintage, and it will be the same vintage for everything. So Vintage 17 was a quite good vintage for us in terms of quality and quantity. It's not always the case. Sometimes it's good in quantity and not in quality, and the opposite. So it's the last vintage with a quite decent crop in both Haute Côte de Nuit and Côte de Nuit. The main reason was that the year before we had frost in 16. So in 16 we had a small production, and the vines did not produce as much as they could. And the year after, so in 17, they produced more than they were able to. So we had to do a strict debudding, and we also had to do some green harvesting to control the production of the vintage 17. And after we had a quite good spring and summer, really hot, but also with some rain. So we had not the problem of lacking of rain like in 19 or 20. And the quality of the grapes was really good. There was not so much diseases, no rot or thing like this. The vintages were quite early, but it's becoming the norm now. So we started on the 9th of September.
Yeah.
and we finished in the 17th of September, so it was quite short. Also, the ripeness came really fast. Normally, it's coming later in the haute côte de nuit, but it was coming really fast. So we had to do the haute côte de nuit just after the côte de nuit. So it was quite fast to ripe at the end of the season. So for us, the vintage 17 is what we call a classical vintage. So it's more fresh. We have more acidity. It's more fruity, more light. So if you want to compare, it's more like 14 or 12. So it's different from the 15 or the 16 that were just before, that were more sunny, more powerful. The 17 vintage are lighter, but they have the complexity, but they are not as powerful, as strong. So
Absolutely gorgeous, yeah.
Absolutely stunning. Is that the wines are really enjoyable, the young. If you want to drink them young, they are enjoyable, and we will taste them today, but you will see they are quite easy to drink.
Yeah.
Even though the days were sort of hot in July and August, September cooled down a little bit, but the nights were quite comparatively cold or cooler.
Yes. There was not. It was not as hot as in 19 or 20. We had cool nights. We had more rain, so it was a normal season, so to speak. It's not a too hot summer.
No, absolutely beautiful. That's stunning.
Very good.
I'm sad that between the three of us, everyone's got their own bottle, but we've got one between the three of us. So I'm sad that went down pretty quickly.
So the Fontaine Saint-Martin, so regarding the aging, so we do not use any new oak for the Haute Côte de Nuit. So for the Fontaine Saint-Martin, we don't use new oak, but we use mainly one wine barrels. So we use the new barrels that were used for Von Romanet, for example, or for Nuit Saint-Georges the year before, and we use them after for Fontaine Saint-Martin. So it's not new oak, but it's one wine barrel. And the specificity also of the domain for the Haute Côte de Nuit is that we use a really large barrel for the first part of the aging. So for 6 months, we use what we call foudre. So they are 20 to 25 times larger than a typical oak barrel. And for the next 12 months, they will be in the one wine barrel from the previous vintage.
I seem to remember talking about global warming, Pierre. Your father mentioning some time ago that he noticed in the Haute Côte from 1985 things started getting warmer. He was harvesting earlier from about 1985. So it's not a brand new phenomenon. Yeah,
it's not new. Since the 80s, we are seeing a consistency in the harvest date becoming early and early. So in the past, yes, in the 70s and 80s, we were harvesting at the end of September, and now the average is more around the 10th of September. So it's a steady change. And for now, especially in the Haute Côte, we are still on the good part of the slope. So it's still a mostly positive effect for the Haute Côte de Nuit, because in the 70s or even the 80s, 1 year we had the good ripeness, and the year after it was more difficult to attain what we were trying to achieve in the Haute Côte de Nuit, even if we don't do good crop, even if we don't do heavy crops, we don't try to produce too much, but even if by reducing the crop, we were not having the good ripeness every year. And since 15 years at least, we have no problem anymore with trying to have more ripeness. And so it's right
Fontaine Saint-Martin is a very special terroir. It's a 7-hectare plot, and the soils are very similar to the top of the hill of Courton.
Yes, so we made some samples of soil 5 or 6 years ago, and the soils are quite different on the top of the Fontaine Saint-Martin from the bottom, but we have quite the same gradient of soil than we have in the top of Courton and the bottom of Courton. So is mostly white marls in this area. So this is why we planted also a lot of Chardonnay. We have 3 hectares of Chardonnay and 4 hectares of Pinot Noir, and it's also good soil for Chardonnay. So since vintage 14, we bought the last parcel we were missing to have the monopoly. So since vintage 14, we decided to make a separate cuvée for this wine. Since it's a monopoly, we are the single owner. And after, in vintage 16, we started to make also a second cuvée of Haute Côte de Nuit, which name is Au Vallon. So we are trying to make different cuvées in the Haute Côte de Nuit, also to be more precise about the climat, the appellation, so people want to know where the wines come from. So it's also interesting to precise on the label to say where do they come from.
There was a question there, Pierre, about the height of the vineyard at Fontaine Saint-Martin, the altitude.
So on average, the altitude of the Fontaine Saint-Martin and all our vineyards in the Haute Côte de Nuit, they are 80 to 100 meters higher than Vosne-Romanée, for example. So Vosne-Romanée is around I would say 250 meters from the sea level, and the Haute Côte are more like 300 to 350. So this is why we have always around 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius less in the Haute Côte de Nuit than in the Côte de Nuit, especially in the summer. So this is why we harvest later.
Yeah, for every 100 meters, it's 1 degree C generally.
Yeah, generally speaking, we see it on the weather data.
And do you think that the vineyards which were considered the best in Vosne-Romanée, say 30 years ago, in the future that will change, that historically sites which were considered too cool will actually be some of the highest quality sites?
I don't know. I know some people say the best places will go uphill. Many people say the best places will go uphill. Right now, even with the last vintages like 18 or 19, I haven't seen or I haven't drunk any wines outperforming some Grand Cru, for example. That could be because most of the time on the top of the Grand Cru you have Premier Cru, or most of the time you have Village. But the problem of the vineyards that are on the top of the hill, so we have also some vineyard in top of the hill, like in Moret-Saint-Denis or in the cuvée of Nuit Saint-Georges Village. But the problem on the top of the hill is that the soil is quite thin. It's really thin, and so you have the wines are quite elegant. You have a lot of finesse, but you lack the structure, you lack the power. So this is why the Grand Cru are in the middle. They have the finesse, the elegance, but they have also the structure. And I don't think it will be changing with the climate change. This is a question of soil more than a question of warmness or not warmness.
Okay.
Okay.
And speaking of Vosne-Romanée, we've got the
we'll be moving to Vosne-Romanée. Yes.
I prefer the size of the bottles you've got in front of you, Pierre, than the size of the bottle we've got.
I will open this one.
Very jealous now.
We look forward to joining you over there. When we can.
Okay, so Vosne-Romanée, so it's a village appellation wine. So I would say it's the most the welcome card of the domain, because it's the most representative of what we do in the domain. Is the base village of where we are. So this wine is actually a blend of 3 different parcels, 3 different climats. The main one is Vosne-Romanée Auréa, so it's just below the Clos d'Herrera which we will be tasting just after. So you have the Clauderia here, and you have the Aurea just below in the small valley below Clauderia. The second one is in terms of size is La Colombière. So La Colombière is just below the Clos du Château in the heart of the village of Vonne-Romanée. And the last one is next to Aurea, and the name of the clémat is Au-dessus de la rivière, so on top of the river, but it's really a small one. So the average year of the vines is 40 years old. So same as what I said for the Clauderia, we have some really old vines and we have also some younger vines. So the mix of them is around 50 years old.
I'm with Jeremy, that's stunning.
Yeah, it's lovely.
This is absolutely lovely. It's à point, delicious to drink now.
Yeah.
Oh.
Especially for
sure.
this vintage, but the Vonne-Romanée is always, if you compare to other villages from the domain, so for example, to compare to Nuit Saint-Georges or Chambol-Musigny, which are more powerful, Vonne-Romanée is always the more delicate, the more subtle, with more delicacy. So it's always really soft tannins.
Mm-hmm.
It's never powerful. It's always soft. So for this vintage, it's really a good wine to drink now. You can wait a little bit more, but it will be good to drink now.
It's beautiful.
It was such a fun vintage 2017 to taste from barrel, and the wines have just stayed like that. I mean, it might not be the greatest vintage of all time, but it's one of the most enjoyable, fun, accessible, joyous vintages that just gives pleasure from the very first sip.
Yeah, you just want to drink it.
Yeah, it was very pretty.
Yeah. And
Really,
very
really
good
good.
terroir definition. When we were tasting the 17s in barrel, you could see each terroir very, very clearly. Whereas if you get a vintage like 2009, very often you just taste the warmth of the vintage and everything's very similar on a kind of different register of ripeness. But this has great typicity.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Now we just need the rest of the bottle.
Just a word about the aging. For all the wines of the Côte de Nuit, the wines will stay for 18 months in oak barrels, and after that we stay 4 to 5 months more in stainless steel tanks before the bottling. And the main difference in aging is the percentage of new oak we use. So for all the villages, Vonne-Romanée, Nuit Saint-Georges, Chambol, we use from 25 to 30% new oak barrel in the final mix, in the final blend. And a specificity also of the domain, a difference from our colleagues in Vonne-Romanée, is that we use barrels which have quite high toast. So I think you know that when the barrels are finished, they toast inside, because if you don't toast at all, it will taste like hardwood. And if you toast it, you will have more delicate perfume. And we tend to use really high, powerful and long toast. So this was the taste of my grandfather and my father, and I am keeping this typicity of the wines. But what is not easy to understand is that the new oak, they will give a lot of taste during the first year of the aging. So if you taste the wines at 12 months of barrel, you will taste a lot the effect of the wood, so the tannins and the smokiness, for example. And after the first year, the sense of new wood, they will start to decline. So this is mostly due to the oxygenation in the barrel, which is quite high in small barrel. And this is why we do long aging, because otherwise we would have for our taste, it will be too much oaky, and we do the 18 months aging to have less oak in the final wine and more delicate wine. So we normally most of the people, when we say that we use a high toast in the barrel, they are always surprised, because it's not really. If you taste the wine, you cannot say that it's high toast in the barrels.
We have a question, Pierre,
Yes.
from Paolo Robino. Did you ever, or do you ever, vinify La Colombière on its own, as some other producers do?
No. So we never vinify in separate. So at the beginning, from the harvest, we do mix all the grapes together. We don't vinify separately. The main reason is the side of the vineyard. So the biggest one is Auréa, as I said, and La Colombière is it's not so small, but it's not big. So it would be difficult to make a separate cuvée of it because it will be like 3-4 barrels. So it's quite a small cuvée, and for me and for my father, it's easier to work, but it's also making better results to have a bigger quantity when you make the vinification, because when you have small quantities, it's really difficult to control the temperature, and sometimes the temperature is going up really fast, and you have bad taste coming in the wine. So you have better results with a bigger quantity in the vat.
Okay.
So this is the same reason we are mixing the New Saint-Georges village, for example, or the Chambol-Musigny village.
This was absolutely gorgeous.
Stunning.
Now pouring the Clodorea.
Since Charlie's pouring, I'm sure this will be a nice amount into your glass.
So
Or not.
An extra milliliter. I need to get better at this.
So we finished with the Clodorea. So it's the flagship wine of the domain. So for many reasons. The first reason is that it's a monopoly, and it's also the only monopoly in Premier Cru in Vaux-Normandie. And in the Côte de Nuits, there is not so much a monopoly in Premier Cru. There are a lot of Grand Cru in monopoly, but not so much in Premier Cru in the Côte de Nuits. The second reason is that it's quite a big parcel for us. It's 2.12 hectares, so the production is quite good. So it's quite easy to find it on the market. So it's a good business card for us. And also it's a special wine for us because it was one of the first parcels that was bought by our ancestor Louis Gustave Gros. It was born in 1860, as I said, and we tried to keep the monopoly in one family. So when it was split, the generation of my grandfather wanted to keep it, so it was kept by my grandfather, and it didn't go to. It was not split with Gros Frères Sœurs, with François Gros, and it was the same at the generation of my father. My father wanted to keep it as a monopoly, and he kept it. So he gave away some vineyards in the Richebourg to compensate, but I think it was a clever choice to keep the monopoly instead of cutting the vineyard in small parts.
Sure.
Okay, interesting. And we have a question from Emil, Galvin, and Louise.
Yes.
They say, "Hi all, the wines are delicious. Thank you. Just wanted to ask about how much sulfur you use in the winemaking."
So at the end of when we do the bottling, normally we are, for all the red wines, we are around 60 milligrams per liter.
Yeah.
If it does ring something to you. So normally the 60 milligram per liter, it's around the limit for red wines in biological. In France, it's for red wines. I think the limit is 60 or 70.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe you can clear up a sort of urban myth for me. I'd heard that when the domain was split in 1995, that
yes,
you did you drew lots, tirage au sort. Your father drew lots with his brothers and sister to decide who would get Clodorea and who would get.
No, it was not. It was not tirage au sort. For the Clodorea, it was my father that said,
"Okay,
I would like to keep it," and his brother and sister they were okay. They were okay with it. So there was no debate and there was no fight about it.
So, but he gave up. To be clear, he gave up his share of Richebourg.
Yes. So Anne-Françoise got the Richebourg part of my grandfather, and I think Bernard got the Clos Vougeot and some. Yes, Clos Vougeot.
Yeah.
Gosh. To be fair, I think everyone did okay. All very nice faces. No, that's absolutely stunning, Pierre.
This is
really good. Thank you.
Spectacular. Really beautiful.
So it's quite the same style as the Von Romanet you just tasted before. So you have it's really delicate. It's not powerful, but you have with the Clodorea you have more length, you have more complexity. You have also more. It's even more delicate. The tannins are really fine, really subtle.
I've got one more urban myth that you can clear up.
Yes.
Where you see the Clodorea vineyard there, where the bunch of grapes are, you see Clodorea is triangular. Where that little white bit is, that's a house, isn't it?
Oh yes, the little white here, it's a house.
Triangular. Yes. It's a triangular house.
Big
yes,
house.
And apparently it affects the microclimate because the north and easterly winds.
Yes. This is yes. So when you look at the map here, you see that on the left of the Clodorea, you have, and on the left of Les Chaumes, you have a village level appellation, and here you have Premier Cru, and the main reason is that Les Chaumes and the Clodorea, and especially Clodorea, because there is a wall and the houses here. In gray, you have a lot of houses. Right. They are protecting all of these vineyards from the north wind, and you have a microclimate here, which is warmer than here or here. So this is why, even if we are a bit lower on the slope than, for example, Malconsort or Suchot, we are still in Premier Cru, yes.
Mm-hmm. So that one was true then, Richard?
Yes. One out of two is not bad.
So we've got a question here from Alfonso, who's asking, which are the differences in yield per hectare between the three cuvées?
Actually, in the Haute Côte de Nuit, the yields are quite low, compared to what people used to do in the Haute Côte de Nuit, because we have a lot of old vines. And in the Haute Côte de Nuit, as I said in the beginning of the webinar, the density is 2 times lower. So you have 2 times less vines per hectare. And since we are trying to do really good wines and high quality wines, we don't want to produce the same yields as we can produce, for example, in Von Romanet. So in Von Romanet, we are trying to produce one good year like 17, around 40 to 35 hectoliter per hectare. In the Haute Côte de Nuit, it's more like 35, 40 maximum, because otherwise the number of grapes per vines is too high, so the quality will be too low. So we try to read. Normally, for example, in Von Romanet or Clodorea, we have only 6 to 8 buds per feet per vine, and in the Haute Côte we try to keep to 8 to 10 maximum. So we cannot have too much grapes per vine, and we have actually most of the time lower yields in the Haute Côte de Nuit than what we have in Von Romanet, for example, or Nuit Saint-Georges. But the main reason is the density is lower. And Clodorea is, of course, a little bit lower than the Von Romanet village, mostly because there are some really old vines in the part of the Clodorea, and they are producing not so much. But the average yield are around 40, for a good vintage, it's around 40 hectoliter per hectare.
Right. And we have a question from Victor of Chez Bruce. He's asked, what is the percentage of new oak for the Premier Cru's?
For the Premier Cru, so yes, I didn't say. Normally it's around 50%. It depends on the vintages, but for 70, it was a little bit less than 50% new oak for all the Premier Cru. So for Clauderia, for Vosne Romanée Haut Brûlé, and for the Nuit Saint-Georges Premier Cru also.
Okay.
Okay.
I just keep going back and smelling it. They're absolutely stunning.
Yeah, we need to get bigger bottles next time.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about next order. Personally.
Yeah.
Well, we also need to ask for a bigger allocation.
Let's not go with that right now. Yeah, but no, truly, absolutely spectacular.
These wines are gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, for me, the straight Vosne Romanée actually is drinking
Same,
so well
actually.
today. The Clos de Reyes.
The Clos de Reyes, I think it would be better to wait a little bit more. It's always a little bit heartbreaking to open a Clos de Reyes that young, but normally we say the best drinking window for the Clos de Reyes is around 10 years. 10 years of bottles, so at least 5 or 6 years more.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people here saying that cracking wines, beautifully elegant wines. Thank you, Pierre. I like to think everyone else is loving the wines as much as we're enjoying them right now.
Right.
What you were saying, Jeremy, about allocations, I think Pierre has he's managed to find us a little more 2017 Clos de Reyes at the Domaine.
Oh, fantastic!
So we're actually out of stock. We're actually out of stock of this wine, but we're able to get a tiny bit more.
Would there be any more straight Romanée 2017? If there is, we'll certainly take it.
Only purely for personal consumption.
We want it all here.
Great.
Fortunately, 17 was a good quantity, so we have a bit more than, for example, 18 or 19.
I think you'll have Jeremy on the phone tomorrow then, Pierre. But truly, thank you. And if anyone has any other final questions, oh gosh, yes, I think it's popping up right now. Yeah, people just saying, something like, no, blast back on. If possible, could Pierre comment on Premier Cru Haut Brûlé?
Yes, yeah. I will open the map and I will show you for the Haut Brûlé.
And also Clos de Vougeot, Pierre, because you're in a very good part of Clos de Vougeot.
Yeah. I will do it also after. So, Haut Brûlé, it's a Premier Cru in Vosne Romanée, and it's located just next to the Richebourg parcel of the Gros family. So the parcel of the Gros family is in the what was called before the Clos des Verroilles. So now it's called Richebourg, and our plot is just here in the triangle here, the Haut Brûlé. So just next to us, there is Méo, but our part is here. So the parcel is 0.63 hectares, so not too big, but quite okay for Vosne Romanée Premier Cru. The specificity of the Haut Brûlé, for me, it's not the most typical climat or appellation of Vosne Romanée. It's quite similar to Richebourg, so they are always more powerful, always more smoky, always more. You have toasted aromas in the wines, so they are not as delicate, but they are more powerful, more full-bodied. So they are really good wines, but quite different from the Clos de Reyes. So for me, Clos de Reyes is really the best example of the Vosne Romanée style, really delicate, really delicate, elegant. And Haut Brûlé, it's quite the opposite. It's more powerful, more wild, more masculine wine. But they are all good wines, but quite different.
Yeah.
And the Clos Vougeot. So the story about this part of the Clos Vougeot, because in the family there was a big plot in the Clos Vougeot that was bought by if you remember, in the history by Jules Gros. But the part he bought was on the top here, in the part that was called Musigny, and this is now farmed by Gros Frères et Sœurs. And there was also a part here in the Grand Maupertuis, which is now farmed by Anne Gros, the daughter of François Gros. But our plot is not a plot from the plot that was bought by Jules Gros. It was bought more recently by my grandfather when my father was, I think, 11 years old. It was in 1967, so he was 11 years old. So it was like a birthday present for my father. So it's quite small. It's 0.2 hectare, but it's already a good present for birthday. It's in a good part of the Clos Vougeot because it's in the top, and it's also just next to the Grand Échezeau. So the rows are just next to the ones of Anne Gros, but Anne Gros has a bigger parcel than what we have. The only problem with this plot of Clos Vougeot is that the vineyards are not so old. If you look at the technical sheet, it's 25 years old, but they have a problem of they are degenerative, so the production is becoming lower and lower every year. So we have the quality is really good, but the quantity is not so good.
Is that the rootstock 161 or something?
Yes, yes. This part was yeah. In fact, the story is that this parcel was damaged by the frost, the winter frost, not the spring frost, but winter frost in 1985. So the vines were almost all killed by the winter frost. So we uprooted the vines, and it was replanted in 1987. But it was replanted with mostly with 161-49C. And this rootstock is problematic right now in Burgundy with the drought condition, because before we had enough rain to overcome the problem of this rootstock, but we know since many years that this rootstock is it has problems with the conduction of the sap inside from the rootstock to the Pinot Noir in the top, but because of the drought, the lack of rain in summer, the problem of the rootstock are becoming too problematic, and the vines are dying. They produce nothing.
Right.
Gosh, but in regards to the wines we've had this evening, Pierre, I mean, I know we've all said it. There's Claudia Agliano saying thank you all for delicious wines. And I think Blaise Le Mesurier is also saying fabulous selection of wines with a lovely Daxaronian family. Thank you, Pierre. Truly spectacular. Wines are stunning. I think we all agree the wines are spectacular. So truly, thank you so much for sharing them with us this evening.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you in Burgundy soon.
We hope
Yes,
so.
I hope so, yes.
Yeah, le souffle, see that.
Thank you very much.